Shroyer, and I live in South Bend. I'm a retired school teacher who's also done part-time work at a radio station. It's actually in Elkhart, but it serves the South Bend market. As part of that, I don't know how that works. Can you hear me? Sorry.
You want me to introduce you? I feel like we've all gotten to know
I
each other
sort of-
really well here these last 10 minutes or so. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what I'm doing with the microphone.
Okay, microphone's easy. I'm gonna click it on you right here,
And I carry this around.
and you can put it right there. That's absolutely fine. And let's turn that on and make sure. Give me a test.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Try it.
1, 2.
That was better.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
We appreciate you all bearing with us. We are a PC business, and so sometimes Max or yourself, you might be a little too loud. I'm going to stay right here for a second. We are so excited to have Sid Shroyer here. I was able to share with Sid this morning. We have had 25 copies of his book here at the museum, and we've sold all but 2, and I think I saw at least one of them sell this morning. Sid has more copies, no worries. So you can get a copy while he's here today. This is more than just a book. Sid, this has ties to his family, ties to his heritage, and I think it's fair to say it's a passion project, isn't it?
it is.
With that, he's going to tell you his story. I'm going to fiddle with the mic here as he gets started just a minute. We apologize for the technology. Do we know what happened to the remote so we can just shut that off? Oh, thank you. Okay, so it doesn't distract you. And we're going to roll with it because historically that's what we do.
Okay.
All right.
In about 3 weeks, Judy, this is my wife Judy. Judy's been like part of this the whole way. In 3 weeks, it'll be 5 years since our grandson was born. His name is Vern, which was my father's name. And on the morning after the new Vern was born, I woke up with this idea that I ought to write my grandson a letter and tell him a little bit about whatever I could think of about Dad, since they share a name. Seemed like a good idea. So I just started writing some things down from my memory. My dad was a basketball player at Somerset High School. He graduated in 1935. And so it was one of the places I looked was newspaper files, which you can access online. There's a site called newspaper.com. So I started doing some investigating, looking into Dad's life, and it wasn't long after that that I realized that if I was going to tell my grandson about Dad, I would have to say something about what happened to Somerset, which has always been an interesting topic for me for as long as I can remember. As a matter of fact, my very first memory is of my father's farm, where my dad grew up, his father's farm. Let's see, how do I do this? Okay, so this was a map I was going to show you that actually Dave Compton gave me. Some of you probably know Dave. And he invited me. I went to a Somerset Lions Club meeting because a friend of mine said I really needed to talk to people once I got into this. Anyway, this is a map that shows you where Dad's farm was as it relates to Somerset. North, about a mile north and a mile west is where my dad grew up. Some of you probably already know or remember Vernie Nee. Vernie was my Aunt Vernie. She's Dad's aunt. She's my grandfather's sister, Vernie Nee, and she lived across the road. So there's that connection. This is a picture I wanted to show you of the farm where my dad grew up, my granddad's farm. It's a pretty picture. It no longer exists. It actually wasn't flooded, and there's a picture of this on the wall on the stand back there. It was never actually flooded by the reservoir, but the property was taken, and so it's overgrown now. I have pictures of that too. This is just some pictures of Dad when he was little. I don't know what's doing that. Here's some pictures. I should just let you pass this around. There's a picture of me in a swing out in front of the property with some cousins, my sister and me, AJ's mom. It looks like I'm maybe 2 years old. This is a picture of the house after it was gutted, before it was burned down. A nice old farmhouse was changed. I took a picture of the scene that is there now. You can't really see it on this screen of what it looks like. There's a newspaper article about, this is a picture of my brother and my sister and me looking at the water of the property. And then this really starts where I wanted to start my presentation today really was to talk to you about the research that Judy and I did that led to the book. How many of you already have the book? I'll kind of get an idea of where I am. Okay. Let's see, how did the research? Okay, I left off talking about Dad and wanting to find out about what happened to Somerset. I did some online research, and through that discovered there were files at the Indiana State Library on the Mississippi Reservoir in two places. One is with a man named Ralph Rossler, and the other was with a former congressman, a man named John Beamer. And there were many, many, many boxes of files that Judy and I looked through at the Indiana State Library. On a number of occasions, we drove from South Bend to Indianapolis to go to the library, and discovered very quickly on that in the box of files with Ralph Rossler, that he kept very detailed information, and I'll talk about that more later, about when he quit keeping detailed information, about the project. And Ralph Rossler, and I'll show you some newspaper clippings, was later named the father of the Mississippi Reservoir. He was deemed that in both the Wabash Plain Dealer and the Marion paper, the Chronicle Tribune. And he was an important person at every step of the way. He was on the reviewing stand for virtually every dedication and groundbreaking for the Mississippi, the Salamone, and the Huntington/Roush reservoirs. He was present. And what happened was in 1939, Ralph Rossler went with a friend to Lake Schaefer, which is in Monticello, not far from Lafayette, Indiana Beach. You're familiar with Lake Schaefer? Ralph came back from that trip with an idea, and this was in May of 1939. He came back with an idea, and his idea was it would be nice to have one of those in my neighborhood. And that was the beginning of the Mississippi Reservoir and the entire what later became known as the Upper Wabash Valley Flood Control Project. And Ralph was involved in that the entire time. Ralph was a business owner in Marion, Indiana. He owned a jewelry store, which I also would like to be able to show you a picture of. It's in there if you want to look later. He was on the square in Marion, which was sort of the main retail area. Downtown Marion was a very vibrant place when I was growing up. That was a place that, well, that's where I was born. We shopped there. I was there with my mom probably about once a week. So Ralph Rossler had a jewelry store. He was involved in the Kiwanis Club. He took this idea, wouldn't it be nice to have one of those lakes, to the Kiwanis Club, and they agreed it was a good project. And Ralph began to pursue it. He made quick contact with a congressman, a man from Kokomo named Forrest Harness at that time. And Harness encouraged him to pursue the idea. And one of the things I wanted to show you was a letter an account of Ralph Rossler's diary, which I'll just jump to and read. Um, let me just read from his diary. This is May 21, 1939. Dinner at Fisherman's Paradise and a trip around Schaefer Lake, suggesting the possibilities of a singular development on the Mississinewa. So that he came back with that idea. A couple of entries later, he mentions a telegram that he sent to Harness, the congressman. Our district federal water conservation department wants flood control project for Grant County. Stop. Kiwanis Club, an entire community sponsoring dam at Connors Mill on Mississinewa River to create a reservoir from Matter Park to Connors Mill. So at the time that Ralph came up with this idea, he envisioned the lake, the reservoir, just west of Marion. And then that changed a little bit later on. Ralph was part of that change. I'm going to skip a couple of days in his diary. Received a letter from Forrest Harness with a copy of a bill he suggests presenting to Congress. This is like 2 weeks after he got back from this trip to Lake Schaefer. He's got a congressman introducing a bill to pursue this project. Okay, June 6, 1936. To author, receive letter from Harness, copy of a bill he suggests presenting to Congress to provide for a survey of the Mississinewa River in the state of Indiana from Matter Park to Connors Mill. Later in that same day's entry, called to Washington, Representative Harness out of city, talked to secretary, bill already in hands of committee and in hopper, explained carefully to secretary that we do not want flood control that means merely damming up the river and controlling the water flow. Our primary objective is the creation of a lake or a reservoir by backing up the river. So this is part of the controversy about this project from the beginning. There were a lot of critics who complained that this really isn't about flood control. It's about creating a lake that people can put their boats on. That was Ralph's initial idea, and it was only when the promoters of this project discovered that they could get money through the federal government by putting it in within the framework of flood control that this project could proceed. In 1943, there was a pretty bad flood in the area, and some people, mayors, businessmen from the area, Wabash, Peru, Delphi, they met together and formed a group to study what they can do about floods. And later that same year, in just a couple of months, they merged with a Wabash River group from the southern Indiana. And that group, by 1944, had become something called the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, which Ralph helped to organize, and he was an original member. And the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission was designed ostensibly to investigate flooding in the state, but Ralph was pretty much running the organization, and he continued to pursue the idea of reservoirs and lakes. So the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission was born on November the 9th, 1944, and it expired on June the 25th, 1965. The Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission was in existence to promote the Upper Wabash Valley Flood Control Project. It really didn't regulate water or flood control in the state. It was designed to promote the project. And so it disbanded the day before the Huntington Reservoir groundbreaking, which was the last of the three. The Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission was no longer needed at that point, so it disbanded. In the disbanding, and I have an article here from the Wabash Plain Dealer, the state's new Department of Natural Resources will assume the commission's functions July 1st. So whatever it was this commission was doing was turned it over to the DNR. One of the things I discovered in this project was that there's almost no information about what went on in this project between the years 1945 and 1954. In fact, Ralph Rossler, who kept really detailed notes about this project, as you can tell from the diary entries, beginning in 1939, really up until 1968. But there's a gap, 1945 to 1954, which is actually when this was being planned. By the time people in Somerset and Wabash and Dora and any place else found out about this, it was a done deal. People were continuing to write to the congressman to suggest that this was not a good idea, but it's obvious from my research that at that point it was already settled. I went back last week. I noticed that the Department of Natural Resources took over the commission's work, so I went to the DNR website, Indiana State Government, and typed in Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission and Upper Wabash Valley Flood Control Project, 1945 to 1954. No results, which was exactly what we found at the State Library, the Indiana Archives, the IU Library, and in the book I have the excerpt, Ralph Rossler's remarks on those years. It is about, I don't know, a half of a page, a third of a page, with no real detail about what happened. How did this come to be? So the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, let's see, where did I put my book? Let me read a little. I would have done this anyway. 40 to 42. According to notes he kept in his diary, Rossler gave the January 1945 hearing with the Army a history lesson. In the spring of 1943, he told the Corps of Engineers this was the very first meeting that the newly formed Flood Control Commission had with the Army. And this commission had been set up by the governor, later approved by the legislature. In the spring of 1943, he told the Corps of Engineers, this territory suffered another disastrous flood. A forward-looking group of men, as I mentioned, formed an association, the Upper Wabash River Association. Officers and directors were elected, myself as president. Work was immediately started by these men to further interest on the part of the federal government in the need of a more unified program for the entire valley or tributaries of the Upper Wabash. The federal government had the money. The Army had the money. On August 9th, 1943, at a meeting of a group representing the area of the Lower Wabash and the Upper Wabash River Association, the two groups were merged, and later they became the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, because the governor and the state needed to have an organization that was qualified to meet with the Army. Later, and it's an important part of this story, there was something called an interim report that was first made, well, it wasn't really released to the public, well, ever, but sort of released in September of 1955. But it was in the works for quite a while, and there were several mentions of this interim report. And in that interim report, it mentioned what they called two public hearings. One of them was in 1946, and the other was in 1950. In the 1946 meeting, the chief engineer of the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, a man named David Harker, suggested that tributaries might be an effective way to control floods. This is a story that was in the Indianapolis News about that meeting on October 23rd, 1946. The story says, utilization of Wabash River tributaries in north central Indiana may lessen the need for artificial flood control projects. David H. Harker, chief engineer of the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, said today. When the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission first formed, Ralph Rossler suggested that levees, channel deepening, soil conservation, small reservoirs at headwaters, and larger ones could be utilized in controlling floods. By the time of the 1950 so-called public hearing, Harker, the chief engineer, was gone, and there was no more mention of channel deepening, levees, soil conservation, and small reservoirs. The entire project had become large reservoirs. There was no more mention in terms of flood control of other strategies other than that. And that's how it came to be sold. It's interesting that there was, and this pops up in the book, there was something called a small dams plan, which is best described by a circuit court judge named Kennedy in a letter he wrote to the congressman at that time by the name of John Beamer. And there were other critics of the plan who suggested that the small dam plan ought at least to have been considered. It was something that was run by the Soil Conservation Service of the United States government. From time to time, Congressman Beamer investigated whether or not a small dams plan might be a better idea. And in one of those investigations, he contacted both an engineer and an administrator with the Soil Conservation Service that managed a small dams plan. And they said, both of these men, Donald Williams and Gladwin Young, said, we were never approached by the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission about the work that we do. We would have considered investigating it, but no one ever talked to us. It's interesting that the executive secretary, a man named Robert Kellum, his office in Indianapolis was a 7-minute drive from the offices of the State Conservation Service. But at no time between 1945 and 1954 was any contact made with people who could have helped come up with an alternative to the flood that drowned Somerset. So again, I want to tell my grandson about Dad. Part of that story is what happened to Dad's town, where he went to high school, where he lived nearby, what happened to that farm that I can remember from being 3 years old. And this is the story that I ran across, that perhaps there was another alternative, but that alternative would not have included a big lake, which was Ralph Rossler's initial idea. And again, you see Ralph Rossler at every step all the way through. until the end, and he was deemed the father of the Mississinawa Reservoir. So David Harker, no longer the chief engineer with the commission, and he told a newspaper at one time that he retired from that position because he felt it was becoming too political. Whatever studies the IFC, WRC, and the Army Corps of Engineers did between 1943 and 1950 on using tributary control to cut costs on what became known as the Small Dams Plan are hidden. By the time the people in Somerset and Wabash and Peru and Logansport found out about what the IFC, WRC, and the Army had in store for them, the only reasonable question was the choice between big dams or floods. You want floods? Well, nobody wants floods. Okay. Then we're going to have big dams and big reservoirs. Just trying to find my place, sorry. The Small Dams Plan never got a proper hearing, not in public anyway, not so the general public knew about it. A less evasive, less expensive strategy was not an Army priority. They had the money. The other public hearing was in Crawfordsville, Indiana. That's, by the way, 96 miles southwest of Somerset. Was March 27th, 1950. Again, Harker was gone by this time. Neither of these public hearings gathered input from the public. After the fact, both would be used as examples of a proper procedure to satisfy a bureaucratic checklist. For the 1950 hearing, unlike the 1946 meeting, there was no mention of a less expensive use of tributary control or a small dams plan. By then, the March 28, 1950 Lafayette Journal and Courier reported the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission was only recommending to the Army the construction of 3 reservoirs that would be up and running 20 years later. Those would be, it said, near Huntington on the Wabash, at Dora on the Salamone, and at Peoria on the Mississinawa. This is the first official public evidence I found of precise locations for where the dams would go. And that's where they went. And this was in 1950. So picture the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, which was set up to promote this project, is in 1950 recommending to the Army that they do something that they've already started doing. And we have a witness in the room. While the story suggests that the State Commission was making a 1950 recommendation to the Army as to how best to proceed with flood control, there's evidence that the Army's proceed had begun sometime before. There's the mention of a 1938 comprehensive plan and an October 1961 Wabash Plain Dealer editorial. There are stories from his stepfather that Dave Compton heard about dams in 1942. Larry Nee said that before his father John died in 1944, quote, he knew the reservoir was coming. I knew of the reservoir coming for as long as I can remember anything, Larry told me. Larry was born in 1938. Wayne Shroyer, that's my uncle, remembers surveying what happened during World War II. Tom Snyder said dam site river gauges were installed in the 40s. Karen Stauffer still lived 75 years later on the farm where she witnessed Army reservoir planning in 1948. She told me at the Wabash History Museum on February the 2nd, 2023, quote, in the spring of 48, there was a guy in our backyard with surveying equipment. I'm 3 years old and I went out and asked him what he's doing there. He picked me up and told me to look through his scope, and he told my mom that I could tell people that I surveyed for the reservoir. That's the first we'd heard that they were even thinking about a reservoir. The spring of 48, Vern. That's between 1946 and 1950, isn't it? My dad started asking around in 48, but nobody knew anything, Karen said. It was a concern to think that nobody had ever heard of this, and they're out there surveying our place. There were rumors, you know, that there was going to be something, but the government was pretty quiet about it. In 1950, the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission recommended to the Army that the place the Army had been surveying in Karen's backyard in 1948 would be a good place for a reservoir. That then, in 1955, was described as a public hearing. So there's a sort of upside-down relationship between the bureaucracy units, the Army, and the commission that was set up by the state of Indiana. The Army's really running the show. And the commission is telling the Army what the Army wants them to tell them. And they're not the only ones. As I mentioned before, Rossler's diary notes, etc., only a paragraph for all of the years 1945 to 1954. And he kept some pretty extensive notes. As a matter of fact, in March of 1954, here's the report. This is what I was going to show you. In March of 1954, according to Rossler's own notes, he reported to the commission, quote, phase 1 has successfully passed, and quote, I believe that the commission members should graduate from the matters of preparation to the acts of accomplishment, and those acts require broad policy, sound salesmanship, and good publicity. This is March of 1954. It's a done deal. What we have left to do now is to sell it. In my opinion, the next 10 years in the life of the flood control, of the Flood Commission, will be the years of justification. For many of the results of years of planning, of mapping and charting, will become realities, is operative. I sincerely believe we are ready for phase 2. March of 1954. I don't know how I'm doing on time. How am I doing on time? Okay? Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about, so I guess, you know, what I think of as the years from 1945 to 1954 is a plan proceeding without any kind of public notice or input. So I want to talk a little bit about the reveal, what I call the reveal. This is Congressman Beamer. This is an Army Corps of Engineers general named Itchner, and this is a picture of Ralph Rossler. So I was going to have them on the wall up here. In May of 1954, again in March, right, Rossler had given this report to the commission saying phase 1 is over, it's time for phase 2, it's time to sell it. We've done all the preliminary work, all the plans are in place, we know where everything's going to be. And I'm going back to the interim report. Rossler was informed by the general, Ishner, that an interim report on headwater reservoirs is being prepared. This is May 1954. In July of 54, Congressman Beamer got a letter from Itchner that told him there was an interim report. And on the very same day, July the 6th, 1954, Rossler was informed by Itchner, the general, that procedure for approval is in place and progressing, and that all interested parties will have an opportunity to state their support or opposition. So the general is telling Rossler, we're good to go. Everything's where it needs to be, right? We've got this interim report working on, and we'll let people know what's in it a little later. But I can tell you right now, we're in good shape on this project. On July the 30th, 1954, that's later that month, there was a big caravan. And here's a picture from the Indianapolis Star. This is a picture of some of my family because I wanted to kind of put it in time. 100 people in 42 cars toured the Mississinawa and Salamone Dam sites. And after that, they had lunch at the Honeywell Center. And this picture in the Indianapolis Star is of Tony Holman. You know who he is? He was the guy that said, "Gentlemen, start your engines." He was the president of the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, but he didn't really do anything. Rossler and the executive secretary, Kellum, and a banker from Peru by the name of Carlos Life with a big, what do you call them, muckety-mucks in the commission. Tony Holman, as best I can tell, was probably a figurehead. You know, it's nice to have somebody famous on the board. It gives you credibility. So anyway, this is a picture of Tony Holman and a colonel in the Army, Army Corps of Engineers by the name of Milne, M-I-L-N-E. Who else do we have here? Oh, the lieutenant governor, and here's Mark Honeywell. And the story is about the caravan, the tour, but it's also about the interim report. It has a little bit of a hint. Even though the interim report won't be public for quite a while, they're hinting at what's in it in a very favorable way. So there was some publicity in 1954, in July, about this is happening. This is a letter that Gene Smith wrote, who was the owner of the Somerset hardware store. He wrote a letter to the Congressman Beamer. It's dated May the 10th, 1955, right? And the letter says, what's going on with this reservoir, you know? We hear rumors, we don't really know what's happening. Can you give me some information? You know, people around here are concerned. It's an interesting letter. Would you please send me some information pertaining to the flood control dam on the Mississinawa River near Peoria as to its length, height, water level to be maintained, acreage flooded, and approximately how much it will raise the water level here at Somerset. He mentioned something about, needless to say, there are rumors. And then in the final paragraph, Gene Smith says, it seems to me that this dam would be a very worthwhile project, as in addition to flood control, there is the creation of an artificial lake that would be a good, you know, addition to our park system. So Gene Smith wants to know what's going on, but he's not in opposition to the idea of the project. It's interesting because later on, and I'll pull this out of the book, in another, I think, letter to Beamer, if I remember right. No, it was a telegram. I'm sorry, it was a telegram in response. His was a letter. He called the project this is Gene Smith, he called it a pointless program with the aim of creating a recreational area that the general population called wasteful and unnecessary. He called Rossler and the mayor of Peru, a man named John Devine, fanatics at that point. So a year later, after Gene Smith found out that Somerset was going to be flooded, he wasn't so much in support of this flood control project anymore. So he wrote this letter to Beamer. Beamer passed it on. We okay? He passed it on to Milne, who I showed you the picture of. He was a colonel and had a lot to do with the project. And then Milne wrote back to Beamer on May the 25th, 1955. So essentially 2 weeks after Gene Smith wrote this letter to Beamer, what's going on with this project, Milne wrote back. Reference is made to your letter, in which you request information, and he gives some detail. And then in the third paragraph, he says, the top of the proposed flood control pool on the Mississauga River is elevation 779, which would require a dam about 137 feet in height. The reservoir at elevation 779 would cover 12,800 acres and extend up the Mississauga Valley about 28 miles. The height of the flood control pool at Somerset, Indiana would be approximately 75 feet above the stream bed and would cover the present site of the community. So there you have it. Milne. Yep.
I'm Tom Snyder.
Right.
The elevation below the bridge at Old Somerset, what he's talking about, is approximately 705 feet above sea level. The main street in front of the hardware, in front of where my folks' Hogan grocery store was right at Summer Pool, 737 feet.
Okay. So
That gives you an idea.
it would cover the community. Now, it's a little odd because language from Milne's letter to Beamer was reported June the 1st, 1955.
Yeah, it's in PDF format, but can I catch up with you? I sent it to my Wabash High School teacher husband who has a Mac.
Well, thank you.
Woohoo!
Well, yeah, try to catch up. And this is sort of the things I was talking about. In terms of just getting going. So anyway, well, yeah. Why don't you get up to here? See if you can.
I can do it. Okay.
Yeah, we're close. We're close. Just when you get a little more. Okay, the reveal. Okay, next page. Okay, now the next page. Sorry. Okay, here's the letter that Gene Smith wrote.
Since I've interrupted you now, I'm going to bump that up just a little higher.
Okay.
There we go. Okay.
I don't know, the separation here is a little weird because we've transferred this a couple times, but I wanted to give some information about who Gene Smith was. Somerset High School grad, attended Manchester College, married Mary Miller. Does this all sound right? And Gene Smith's daughter's in the room. I said I should get her autograph. So anyway, I found this picture of downtown Somerset somewhere online. And this is the brick building is the hardware. And Beamer forwarded the letter to Milne, and then Milne wrote back, uh-oh.
There you go.
Oh, it's because I'm not on my own computer. I'm weird. It's weird. Okay. So the exact quoted language appeared in a newspaper article, actually in two papers, that shared a bureau, Indianapolis News and the Muncie Star Press on June the 1st, along with a comment from Beamer saying that he would oppose any far-flung plans to move Somerset. The Kokomo newspaper and a paper from Bedford, Indiana, ran similar Associated Press stories the next day. Here's a story from the Muncie paper, June 1st, 1955. And Beamer has to have been the source for this because he's quoting the letter he got from Milne. And he said in the story that he would oppose any plan to eliminate Somerset. All right. So, this is where I took an opportunity to make an editorial comment, although the book is pretty much an entire editorial comment, right? Because I'm writing to my grandson, I get to do that. Handy. Language from Milne's letter to Beamer was reported June 1st, 1955 in the Indianapolis News and Muncie Star Press. It sent Rossler, Kellum, and Peru IFCWRC member Carlos Life into a PR campaign. I would have used the word frenzy, but that seemed a little abrupt. So I'll just say a PR campaign, all right? And Beamer almost immediately disavowed the "I'll protect Somerset" comments. I never said that. Okay. But I don't think Rossler, Kellum, and Life ever got over what they perceived to be Beamer's betrayal. Although, those of you who read the book know that all along the way, Beamer seemed to be doing everything he could to promote the project. Remember, March 1954, Rossler had said, "I believe that the commission members should graduate from the matters of preparation to the acts of accomplishment, and those acts require broad policy, sound salesmanship, and good publicity." So, June 3rd, Wabash Plain Dealer, big headline, front page story, moving of Somerset seen in flood plan. Well, what is the flood plan? The flood plan is the interim report that hasn't been made public yet, that they keep talking about. And what they do, pretty consistently, is cherry pick the interim report for those things that make the reservoir look like a good idea. So, call a press conference. This is the story. And it's really actually kind of insulting when I read this story. This is, according to Kellum, and I know you probably can't see this. I'll just read. Let's see, where was I? According to Kellum, Somerset itself would be flooded only during flood control periods, but it would make the town uninhabitable because the area might be deeply underwater for a period of from 1 to 4 weeks each spring. Over $700,000 has been set aside for relocating Somerset, he said. This is much more than the actual value of the town. So you sort of get the sense that the commission is suggesting that the people in Somerset ought to be glad we're doing this. He felt that the people of Somerset would benefit as the town is located at the upper end of the permanent pool, the best location. He said they could build an ideal model town. This is a letter, June 5th, 1955, that Rossler wrote to the Congressman Beamer. Also pretty revealing. Third paragraph. This afternoon, Bob Kellum, that's the executive secretary of the commission, called me, and we are agreed now that most of the story has been released in the Peru meeting, that information should be gotten to residents of Somerset and to the rest of the district, the benefits to be derived from a relocation to higher ground of the Somerset buildings and holdings. Many of the buildings are very old, and there is considerable sentiment involved, but once the residents understand they will be well taken care of, they will be paid for any damage incurred and will end up by a replaced village on high ground in an admirable location to become a revived lakeside resort village. Then they will see the benefits against the disturbance incurred.
That was all false.
Huh?
That was all false.
I still didn't hear you.
That was all false.
That was all false.
They never moved the town.
No, they never did. There's a lot of things that get said in retrospect, looking at this material, again, I was trying to tell my grandson about my dad. And we got into the Indiana State Library, and I discovered these papers from Rossler and from Beamer, and these letters from constituents. And I thought, I can't keep this to myself.
Thank you.
All right. So the last, this is, again, Ralph Rossler's letter to the congressman. Ralph Rossler, the father of Mrs. Inlaw Reservoir, June 5th, 1955. It's, like I say, it seems insulting. It would seem to me that you will have little trouble convincing your constituents that relocation means a great improvement to Somerset and of great value to each individual involved. So it really turns the idea, to me, it turns the idea of like democracy upside down, you know. Like you're supposed to be listening to the people, but the idea here is to convince the people that we know what's best. And we're gonna, right, sell this plan. Okay. Upstairs here in the research room, I found this letter. It's a letter from the executive secretary of the commission, Bob Kellum, to the publisher of the Wabash Plain Dealer, Joe Nixon. It's a you could say message. And again, the date on this is January the 10th, 1955. This is before the big reveal stuff. And again, it's about the interim, the so-called interim report, which Kellum has. He's seen it. He knows what's in it. And the Army's telling Kellum what to tell the publisher of the Wabash paper. So it's a PR campaign, enlisting the local paper. This middle part, you could say, above that, enclosed is a summary of a report the Corps of Engineers has made to us. It is not for public use from them, underline emphasis, but I believe that if you want to use a story with these facts in it, but not crediting the Corps of Engineers directly, it would be all right. You could say that engineers of the Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission, on basis of preliminary findings, estimate the reservoirs would have cut 6 feet off the 1913 flood at Logansport. So, 1955, is this right? Yeah, early 55. The Wabash paper is being enlisted in support of this project. There isn't an independent, like, source of information on this. And, well, there are lots of commissions, but none of them have anybody from Somerset on it. It's pretty hard, again, a personal comment, it's pretty hard for me to come across this information and not feel like I had to tell you about it. For the purpose of sound salesmanship, a simple choice, big dams and reservoirs or floods. Again, I don't know how I'm doing on time. I could go all day, but so what am I supposed to do? Keep going? A little longer? Yeah, a little longer is all I really have. Moving of the graves is a personal story for me because my grandmother's grave was at Pleasant Grove, right? It was at Pleasant Grove and was one of the ones that had to be moved. My brother, who was a source for this book, and my father and my grandfather were called to be witnesses on the day that her grave was moved, which was the day after Memorial Day in 1966, which is really fitting because we spent Memorial Days at the Pleasant Grove Cemetery when I was a kid honoring veterans. And that's where my grandmother was buried. Her grave was one of the ones that was moved. And the story of, it was a story of how an official version of events becomes a conventional wisdom, which becomes history. That's how it's told. Because when I talk to people about this who were alive then but weren't actually the witnesses, their stories were similar, that it was done in a respectful manner. Almost word for word, that's what I heard. It's a terrible thing that had to happen, but I know it was done in a respectful manner. That's not what my brother saw. And that's not what Tom's father saw. But that became the official version. I was fortunate in that I was able to come across this booklet. You'll see it's the final report, Cemetery Location Plan number 2 for the cemeteries, Wabash County, Indiana, from the Army Corps of Engineers, which was issued in June of 1968. I was able, because of that report, to locate the exact day that my brother and my father and my grandfather went to witness the moving of Eva Shroyer's grave. That's my grandmother and my grandfather in their home. Part of the report was pictures. were pictures of the graves, just the cemeteries before they were moved. Each of, I think there were 6 in the Mississippi region cemeteries. Some of them were very small. One of them had maybe 4 or 5 graves in it. There was a cemetery right across the road from my grandparents that I didn't even know existed until I started doing this, and along the road that where Vernie lived too, on the other side, right?
Hoover Road.
So there's information about the small dams plan. The best place to look in the book for information about the small dams plan, I think, is the Judge Kennedy letter, which is on pages 127 and 129, when I won't read now. There are some really interesting characters in the book by the name of Funderburk, and they were from Huntington County, and they were in opposition to the project, and they wrote a lot of letters to Beamer. It seemed like the elder of the two, Cliff, had a personal relationship with with Congressman Beamer, because they were members of the Indiana State Legislature at the same time. There seemed to be in the letters a sense of familiarity with one another, but their friendship did not outlive this event. The Funderburks were opposed to the project. Ivan eventually ended up testifying at a public works hearing in Congress on the matter, which is an interesting story in and of itself because of the way he was treated. There's certain, I guess I'd call it naivete on the part of the people who, in 1955 and 1956, still thought they could write a letter to their congressman and that it meant something, which is sad, because we like to believe that. But it was a done deal in 1954, right? And all that was going on was the proponents of the plan were selling it. But the Congressman Beamer had to sort of play the game, although at one point he wrote a letter to the Huntington paper publisher and said, I wish you'd quit printing those letters about the flood control project. I can't do anything about it. I'm just one guy. An acknowledgement of his powerlessness in this situation. One thing that I feel like now that I should have done more with in terms of the book was the economic impact and the actual impact on flood control. So somebody else, I guess, can step in and finish that part of the book. There are obvious economic benefits to having these 3 reservoirs in the area and visitors coming in and spending money locally. There are benefits to restricting flooding, especially as it relates to Peru. Seems to be like the place that benefited the most from this. Wabash isn't protected by the Mississinawa Reservoir, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, So there's nothing about the Mississauga Reservoir that protects Wabash. It protects Peru. And so there's an idea of one of the newspaper articles that I ran across in a Peru paper, again, at a time when they were really heavily promoting the project and making sure that money was made available for the project. Could this happen again? Not with adequate flood control. And this is the front page with picture from the 1913 flood, you know. And the idea was if we don't build this project, there's going to be more of this, right? You're given a choice. So who could be in favor of floods, right? But one of the things that occurred to me when you talk about the economic benefit is what about the economic benefit that would have existed if Somerset had not gone away? You know, the map that I had out there, what were there, 40 farms on that little map? And the town itself, Gene Smith's hardware store, what about the economic benefit of that? So typically the economic benefit story is sort of only told in one way, and now I can tell because they're looking at me that I'm way over time. I'm okay. Oh, look. See, I spent a lot of time on this. Questions? Yes, sir.
How did residents, specifically homeowners, I don't know if there were probably not apartments back then necessarily, but what was the level of inconvenience to them? Did they have to move their furniture, store it somewhere before they built a home, or was part of the relocation that they built homes for people?
They didn't build homes for people. Tom, you want to weigh in on this part?
Well, an example is our farm. My dad and mom was Fred and Betty Snyder. And our farm was just across the river from Somerset, although my dad and mom owned stores. And my dad had bought the farm in 1952, 160 acres on the north side of the river. That was settled across from Somerset. And what he paid for it in 1952, the federal government, the Corps of Engineers, who I did retire from and I worked for, did not offer him 10 years later the amount that he paid for 10 years before.
And what about the furniture? You know, that's never really come up before. What happened to the people's stuff?
Well, a lot of people built their new home before they had to get out of their old home. A lot of people did. A lot of people moved, I don't know, like others here, their families didn't move real far, you know, and my dad was president of the Relocation Development Corporation to build the new Somerset. And like Sid was saying, Somerset, at first, the congressmen and politicians were saying they will relocate the town. Well, somebody along the line, probably between 54 and 59, somewhere in that area, said, well, Somerset's unincorporated, so we're not helping you move the town. So that decision got completely changed.
Nobody got money in advance to build a new house to move their furniture to.
Well, like in our case, we built a new home in the new town.
Right.
We moved from our farm over on the north side of the river into New Somerset, and we moved our furniture, the stuff that we wanted. I mean, it was the same kind of process.
But you used the money from the settlement for that.
Building a new home.
They didn't build a new home for you. That was.
Well, yeah, we had to buy the lot, Somerset.
So you were compensated in advance.
Well, you were paid for your farm, and then you didn't have to move out immediately.
Right.
I mean, they gave you time. I think it was in 60.
My grandfather lived in a little trailer in my aunt's backyard in Windfall for the rest of his life. And their farm was 120 acres. I don't know what they got for that. What I know is that he lived in a little trailer in my aunt's backyard for the rest of his life.
Well, that was just your grandpa, not your grandmother passed
Well, she had
away.
passed away.
And the farm was 122.5 acres.
Oh, thank you.
Shroyer farm.
I was close. Come on. I was just rounding off. I knew that. I knew that, Tom. I'm just rounding off.
Well.
Any other questions? Any other?
Working for the Army Corps of Engineers, I seen all these papers.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's not so much a question, just a statement. When I was about 8 years old, I was still a Cub Scout. They had a little scout jamboree down in the middle of the Old Somerset along the river that we had. I don't know where they all came from here in the state, but it was all nothing but scouts. And I remember all the buildings and everything that were still there. And I think that was maybe 63 or 64. The town was empty. Some of the houses were already being torn down, but many were still standing. Needless to say, we had a bunch of young scouts. Nobody lived there. We went around and broke windows in all the houses.
Well, you know, there was,
Oh, there's a statue of
well, you have,
Yeah,
there was a guy named John Huddleston who pops up in 3 places in the book. It's really interesting. Small town, I guess that happens. But he was guarding the high school, which was the last building that was destroyed. And he was like the night watchman to keep guys like you from.
The Methodist Church was the second to last building. That's because we were running a restaurant out of the basement, and we were feeding the guys that were building the dam first part of the lunch hour, and then the guys that were moving the cemeteries were quarantined, then they would come in. I served an awful lot of noodles.
Well, that's an interesting story too. Yeah, there's another. You know, I sort of feel like I skimmed the surface of this. Yes, sir.
Just a thought. It seems as if the government had thoughts about putting flood control in, and they were just waiting for a citizen to say something, and they jumped right on it.
Good observation. And one of the things we noticed, Judy and I noticed when we were doing this research, was how many of these projects were going on all over the country. This was what the Army Corps of Engineers, between, you know, the end of the war, and it's interesting because sort of the last information I ran across dealing with the Flood Control Commission, they had begun to get away from the idea of these big dams. And you don't see them being built anymore, right? I mean, roughly the end of the 60s was sort of the end of those big reservoir dam projects. Judy?
And now there's a movement to undo them in certain parts of the country. And I see that in the news. And then here's just a side anecdote. We were on our way to Thanksgiving 2 years ago, I think, and I saw the name of the town on the sign. I thought, I think I've seen that in our research, and I did some looking. And what happened, in one place in New Jersey, there was a town that was moved to New York. All those people moved, and then the powers that be, whether it was the Army Corps of Engineers or who, did a rethink audit, and they found out there was a fault underneath this place where they were going to put the dam, so they couldn't put the dam in, and those people had already moved. No building.
Adrian?
So, Rossler was from Grant County, right?
Right.
Okay. And he was making decisions in Wabash County?
Well, he's making decisions for
This river.
the Mississippi River and the Wabash River, and what is interesting, near the end of the book, it became controversial in Marion because people in Marion thought the water was backing up and flooding their town, and here it is, Ralph Rossler, their own guy, was the guy who did it. So why, you know, one of the things I noticed was that in finding all this material that Ralph Rossler left behind at the Indiana State Library, and it's still sitting there if you want to go look at it, including the plaques. Anyway, one of the things that now I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah. Oh, Marion. It seemed like he was going to write a book. He had like a title page with his picture on the front, and a title underneath it. going over those notes, I really thought this guy was going to write a book, but I wondered if maybe it didn't turn out the way he wanted it to, and the fact that he became a source of concern in his own hometown. There really wasn't any evidence that it was causing flooding in Marion, but the fact that people thought that he wasn't the hero he wanted to be in all cases. But he sure left some good stuff. It was easy to, it's like we had a timeline to go on with the information, except from 1945 to 1954, when suddenly there's nothing.
And there's a ton of stuff at the Vern Wells Library in Bloomington we found too. And we give thanks to both of the staff at both of those places because they were very, very helpful to us.
Yeah, most of the stuff we got, and I didn't talk about J. Edward Roush's role in all of this, which is sort of a mixed bag. It's like every human being has a mixed bag. The man that they named the reservoir for, his role in all that. Most of the information we found on that was in the Indiana University Library in Bloomington, at the Herman B. Wells. That's where the stuff was for him, including an oral interview that someone had done with him in 1968 or 9. In which he talked about about the dam. I thought I'd recommend some books. If you're interested, one of the things that happened in the course of preparing this was once I got with a publisher, they were recommending books for me to read. Where does your book fit in the greater scheme of things? And I don't know, it's a letter to Vern. Anyway, they recommended some books, and 3 of them are here. Sarah Smarsh's Heartland, Robert Wolfnow's The Left Behind, and Uprooted by Grace Olmsted are about loss. All are about loss in rural communities. And Wendell Berry. Anything you can ever read by Wendell Berry, you should definitely check out. Thanks for attending. Books are here. They're also at Amazon.com. And I'd like to leave you with this. This is a video that Tom took in 1973, and when we connected, and it wouldn't take me long to find Tom, right? If I started looking into this stuff. He sent this to me.
I don't think you can play it because it converted just to a screenshot PDF. You know, I can't play it.
What's that? It won't play?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No.
Well,
But we can put it up on our social media for later, yeah.
That's up to Tom.
That is my grandmother, that's brother and sister.
That's my grandfather.
Grandfather and my grandmother. My grandmother was a Shroyer.
And
that was her 75th, wasn't it? I'm sorry, Judy.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Graham's 75th birthday.
So it's about a 3-minute film of people walking around, and mostly it's on Aunt Vernie and Pop is what I knew him as, what Dad called him, and the community center in Somerset. And my mom and dad are in the film, and I don't know how many of Tom's
There's several
relatives.
My family.
Is your dad in this?
Yeah.
So, thank you.
It wasn't very good. I wasn't very good with that camera. It's fairly new in 73. I've never had one.
Technology's come a long way.
Thanks to Teresa and her staff.
Oh, thanks, Teresa and her staff. I would have.
Thank you so much.
It was on here.
Yes, all right. And we have copies of the book for sale up here. Or if you brought your book and you'd like an autograph, I believe that Sid will do some signing. Also, if you have more questions you'd like to ask one-on-one, make yourselves at home. Grab some coffee or snacks for the road. And remember, now that you're here,